Take their seats. Thank you very much. And I'm going to start while people still roll in, and I don't think that should be an issue. But I'd like to thank everyone for being here today at this public session. For those who are not part of the forum over the last 2 days, this is to let you know that we have celebrating our 15th year of the forum. My name is Nikhil Soni, and I'm the co-chair of the India-Israel Forum, along with my co-chair, Mr. Jamshid Godrej, Mr. Aaron Fogel, and Mr. Stanley Bergman. We're all very happy to be here. Our partners are, of course, Tel Aviv University, and we have Professor Porat here. Thank you very much for your dedication to the forum, as well as the insights that you provide, and, of course, the work that Millet and you do. CII, as well as Adanta Aspen Center. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last 2 days, we've had a variety of conversations which have stretched everywhere from the context of the bilateral relations in the region, the geopolitical context of what's happening in the world, but also focusing on areas of trade and economics, and equally on subjects of academia, industry, partnership, and collaboration on R&D. And lastly, of course, nothing can be left out but on future technologies and how that future technology plays a role in the bilateral relations, and how we can push a greater focus on an area which is of mutual interest. We have a wonderful lineup of participants here, and a lot of them need no introduction, but I will nevertheless introduce them in some manner. Ambassador Noor Gilon needs no introduction, but he is the ambassador of Israel to India. Ambassador Gilon, and I'll read out a little bio so that it sets the context correctly. Graduated from Tel Aviv University with a BA in political science, and he holds an MA in international relations from Corvinus University in Budapest. His vast experience in foreign policy stretches through a career as a diplomat in a variety of different functions, the last, of course, being in Europe. Netherlands.
It's in Europe.
That much. We also have Professor Daniel Zafman here, who is the chair of the academic board of the Israel Science Foundation. He's born in Belgium, and Dr. In Europe, again, sorry, not the Netherlands, in Belgium. And he's received a BSc in technology, followed by postdoctoral work at the Argonne National Laboratory in the US. In 1991, he joined the staff of the Weizmann Institute's Department of Particle Physics, and he has, since 2001, been an external member of the Max Planck Institute in Nuclear Physics. We also have Ms. Tanvi Ratna with us, who's a policy expert with global interdisciplinary experience in blockchain and cryptocurrency, and she's worked with Ernst & Young, as well as advised the Indian Prime Minister on areas such as cryptocurrency and financial matters. We also have Mr. Ashish Kumar joining us. He's a founder member of Fundamentium Advisors, an asset management company and a venture capital company which deals with Series B onwards investments in India and globally. Fundamentium has an enviable list of GPs as well as LPs. So we look forward to the dialogue that we're going to have on the subject of future tech and the relations with geopolitics. India and Israel have celebrating their 30th year as trusted partners, and it's extremely important that we bear it in context for the years to come as to how this relationship has progressed over the course of the last 30 years. The forum itself has played its own role over the last 15 years in enabling and fostering this relation at its own level. The people-to-people connect is what is most important. And as we reach out in this public session to the public at large, I think what I would really like people to take out from here is the incredible amount of work that is happening at multiple different levels on areas which are pertinent not only to the bilateral relations, but essentially to the world at large. The forum picks up a topic every year in which to go into in depth. This year, we picked cybersecurity, which is a very pertinent topic for us to work on, not only on a bilateral basis, but essentially for the globe. And we believe that the report, which was chaired by Mr. Anand Krishnan, who is the CTO of TCS, as well as by Mr. Gyora Yaron, has come out with incredible recommendations as to how we could take some of the service delivery of Israeli capability and capacity down to the MSMEs in India, and how we could provide a resilience to their business model, which is necessary as we look at the risks that the world faces in spaces such as this. The forum has done incredible work in the past in areas such as semiconductors as well, which have been adopted by the government of India, and I think the forum can take some credit to the fact that a PLI now has been catered around this specific sector. So with that, I'd like to start off with opening remarks from our panelists, following which I would like to pose some questions to them myself before we open it up to the audience for questions. So first to Ambassador Gilon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nikhil. Thank you for the right to speak, but also for what you were doing all along these 2 days. I'm a newcomer to the forum. I'm not a newcomer to diplomacy, but it was very impressive. I saw such forums in the past, but I think this is the most impressive one. It's an interdisciplinary group of people, Indians and Israelis, each one bringing his academia. My alma mater was mentioned here, Tel Aviv University, and Professor Porat, practitioners, businessmen, innovation people. We spoke water expert. For me as an ambassador, it's very valuable on 2 lines. First of all, governments cannot replace private sector. Real work is done by private sector. We can create the infrastructure, the basis, the legal arrangements, whatever is needed, but the real work is done by private sector. But secondly, also a lot of ideas and initiatives that will come out of it, I'm sure, came out. And this forum, I think 15 years is going hand in hand in the relations between India and Israel that, as mentioned here, are celebrating 30 years. We are in a very good, I think, very good situation of the relations. My challenge as ambassador is always, when you come to a good situation, it's not how you keep the momentum, how you take it to the next level. And I hope this forum will have also some contribution. I believe that this forum will have some contribution to that. You know, if you look at Israel-India relations, just take, for example, the commercial side. In 92, when we established our relations, our trade was around $200 million, speaking without defense. Today, our trade is inching to $8 billion. It's a huge, huge increase. And this is only one example, but our relations are much, much deeper. And when we discussed in the forum, I think that the word that came, what is the secret of these special relations between India and Israel? I think that the word trust came from many, many directions. Many people said about the intimacy and the trust between the 2 systems. I believe that it was built by hard work of people, and it came also in the forum over the years, especially in the first basis of our relations, which was the defense cooperation. For defense cooperation, you need to have trust, and you build trust over time. And it started with supplying. It went into developing together weapon systems, India and Israel. So that was then, and until today, the security side is very, very important. But it's not the only basis, because then short after joined the agriculture part of it. So Israel has today 30 centers of excellence in agriculture, over 30, I should say. And by the end of next year, we'll have 40 centers of excellence in agriculture around India, more than 20 states, where we try to bring, to adapt the right technology to the small farmers, especially. So that's another element. And I think that in the conference, whoever participated in the last 2 days couldn't but understand the importance of technology as the engine for the future. When we look at the future, it's all around technology, different aspects of technology. So we spoke about quantum, cyber, sustainability, food security, green energy, water, biotechnology. So everything was there. The fields are enormous, but it's all around technology. And I believe that, we speak of the change, also geostrategic change in the Middle East. Abraham Accords and the I2U2 was discussed also quite in depth. And what we are doing here, we are really, the 2 selected first projects, one of them in food security, the other in green energy, It's not only both of them will be done or executed, of course, in India, in partnership of the four I2U2 is India, Israel, USA, and UAE. But beyond the fact that we are going now to do, hopefully, execute very fast, both food farms and clean energy farms, it's not only for us, for the benefit of our peoples, the Indian people, the Israeli people, but it's also, I think, a model for the world. So we are setting here the world, the way forward, because on food security, everyone has to deal with it sooner or later. So I think that I came out with some practical ideas on the way forward, both at the level of government, G2G, and both at the level of business to business. So I would really like to conclude by thanking all the organizers and the people. It's not a great... the people who started it 15 years ago and were able to keep the momentum and have 15 years later, have such an interesting and productive forum. It's it's really, the cheers goes to these people for the stamina and the ability to reinvent every year and find new ways for cooperation and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Gillon. You're very right. The founders of the forum, many of them are here: Mr. Tarun Das, Mr. Aaron Fogel, Stanley Bergman, Mr. Jamshid Godrej, Gary Sussman, Kiran Pastricha, and many others who've really, Tel Aviv University, and they've really taken the relevance of the forum and tried to put it within the context of where we sit, both in a bilateral basis, but also keeping in mind the entire ecosystem in which we're at. I'd like Professor Zafman to address us next, following which I'm going to come to Ashish and then to Tanvi.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm also a newcomer to this forum, and I'd like to thank the organizer, specifically actually the Tel Aviv University, to inviting me. That also means that whatever I say and you don't like it, you have to go to Professor Ariel Porat, who is actually responsible for all this. But Ariel, really, thank you so much. It was actually a very interesting lesson to learn about how to create this kind of partnership between countries. And speaking after 15 years of activities, and I can say there's clearly some important things that have been done, but I even believe that there are important things that could be done. And given the fact that I come from the academic side, from the university side and academic research, I'd like to say a few words about academic relationship. First of all, academic relationship between countries are a very easy entry point. I mean, when you look at the trust that needs to be built between countries, and I know that we're not at this stage, the ambassador says so. After 30 years, we are not talking anymore about trust. It's probably established, but still, the big advantage of academic relationship is that it's really the entry point is easy. We are usually talking about basic science, fundamental research, where the issue of IP and economic value is not evident at the very beginning. I'll tell you that the end result of academic research is one of the most important fuel for economic development, but at least the entry point is a very easy one. Israel has several collaboration with additional countries, namely, mostly, I would say, the United States and Germany. And after ending this forum, I'm asking myself, why don't we have such a relationship with India? India, just like Israel, has an amazing amount of talent, of course, a factor of 100 more, just given the sheer population of India. And clearly, there would be huge advantages to be able to work together. And don't ask me about the fields, because I think the relevant fields are not very important. What we need to do is to approach the talent existing in both countries and offer them the ability to work together. And this is usually done by providing funding grant for supporting fundamental research. And through this fundamental research, we start to have a connection between individuals, between scientists, but also between students of both countries. Now, such a program existed until 2 years ago, actually, and it was run probably as a pilot stage for 4 years. And as someone running the Israel Science Foundation, I can tell you, analyzing the result of this, and it's only 4 years, and in academic research, 4 years is really very little time. I could see that among the best people, at least from the Israeli side that I know, to admit I do not know the Indian side, but knowing the Israeli side that volunteered, if we want, to participate in this program, we're talking about among the very, very best people in Israel. So my first conclusion from this is, given the strengths of the Israel and India relationship, we should restart such a program And we should not restart it for 4 years, because that's not going to give much more than what has been achieved so far, but we should start it forever. We should try to find a framework from which we can actually support scientists from both sides. Don't talk about topics, it's irrelevant. We just have to find the right people working for something interesting. That's what it is. And from there on, over the years, we will succeed to develop, I'm pretty sure, a lot of wealth for both countries. And the reason for this is, and that's another thing that I think which is common between India and Israel, is we both countries have understood that the real wealth is not under the ground, but it's actually 1.7 meters above the ground, right? That's where this is located. And that's where we should invest. And the more we invest in that 1.7 meters above the ground, the richest and the wealthiest we will be. That is very clear for the modern economy. I know that 100 years ago, you could dream that we have a lot of minerals and values under the ground. Oil, for example, you could be a rich country. I think you can see clearly that the future of economy is not related to having this kind of economy, but rather an economy of knowledge, an economy of science and technology. I also want to remind you that science has probably the biggest fuel for changing society. It is not only about developing technologies. I know that the forum has focused on technologies as being, I would say, the focus of this relationship between Israel and Germany. But I want to remind everyone that technology is what is changing our world. If you look at the history of human being for the last 10,000 years, from the invention, or 100,000 years, with the invention of fire, all the way to the invention of rockets, talking to space, you realize that this is changing the way we are actually behaving. The internet is not just a technology. Facebook is not just a web page. It changes the way we communicate, and so it changes the social network of which we are living. And so the ability to promote this kind of science and technology between India and Israel is also a possibility to change, or I would say to control, not in a bad way, but really to successfully do something for a better society. And I know that science has not always been for the benefit of humanity, even though I would say 90% of it is for the benefit of humanity. And so we should play a role, and I can clearly see the value of this kind of advantages. Now, I'll end by saying why there's a huge advantage for Israel to work with India. And I do believe it's the opposite, but I'll leave my Indian colleagues to say so. You see, when you do scientific research, and I mentioned that during the forum, it is not only about the knowledge which is shared between Indian scientists and Israeli scientists, or maybe even infrastructure existing in India and infrastructure existing in Israel. That's a simple part. What we're sharing when we collaborate in science, we're sharing different culture. And while science, the end result of science is cultureless, right? There's actually very few things that are cultureless in the exchange of people. One of them is sport, by the way. You can look at football. When you score a goal, it's the same thing for everyone. 1-0 is 1-0 in all over the world. Well, in science, it's the same thing. If you solve an equation, the result of this equation is the same all over the world. There's no culture in the result. But the way you do science is very much dependent on your culture. And that's the beauty of the process. The way you ask the questions is very much dependent on where you were born, which language you speak, who were your parents, how you were, the whole society you've been living in. And when you share these values between scientists, the big advantage is the result will be not owned by anyone, because the scientific result has no ownership. It is owned by nature. But the beginning of the story is very much an Indian-Israeli story. And we have very different culture. And that's a huge advantage, because we can then start to solve problems none of us can actually solve alone. Again, not because we do not have the knowledge, but because we are different. And the difference is the big advantage. And I'll end up by telling you the story that I said to the president of the state of Germany. I used to work in Germany for several years, and then I moved back to Israel. Well, I never left Israel, but that's another story. And the president of Germany asked me, where is the science better? Is it in Israel or in Germany? You're facing the president of Germany, and you better have a good answer. And the ambassador of Israel in Germany was there, and all kinds of diplomats, and I had to find a good answers to say to the president of Germany, where is the science better? So I told him, have you been to Israel? And he said, yes, I've been many times to Israel. He said, have you been driving in Israel? I said, oh, yes, it's a disaster. I said, well, you see, you German scientists are doing science the same way that you're driving, and we Israeli scientists are doing the same science the same way we're driving. And that's explained to you. The problem with this story is that it doesn't work with India, right? Because Indian driver is actually much more than Israeli driver. So I'm not sure how this will work, but the difference in culture is right there. It is the way you're driving and the way we're driving, which is an example of the chaos that we can create. And remember, in academic research, chaos is great value. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zoffman. I think I will come back to you on some of the questions that you've raised. But could I ask Ashish to address us with your opening remarks, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone.
Can you put your mic on?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Ambassador Gilon started off by saying that he is new to the forums but not new to the diplomacy. I could just inverse it and say that I'm new to the diplomacy but not new to the forums like this. Not this forum specifically, but other forums. So I run a venture capital fund out of India, and we invest in technology companies from India, which are building either for Indian consumption markets or global markets, particularly when it comes to a lot of these software solutions. So I'll try to limit my learnings based on what I have seen and some of the interactions that I have also seen interacting with some of the Israeli founders and the venture capital companies wanting to look at Indian companies and Indian markets, right? And the same thing when I have looked at Indian founders and Indian investors trying to look at Israeli market, whether it is companies and some of this is very similar to has what we have been seeing last 5 years or so, and some of this has been accelerated by kind of geopolitical changes that we have seen in the last perhaps 4 or 5 years or so. So I'll probably group this into maybe saying that there are three areas of collaboration and exchanges that I have seen a lot more between India and Israel, and in terms of the future technology. So the first area that I would say is, these are all digital technology. So India, if you look at Indian founders, the lot of technology innovation in India so far has happened when they have created technology to solve for market access, not so much really for the product, right? Which is why you look at large companies being created, which are really a lot more distribution companies rather than product companies. That's what has happened so far. When you look at Israel, on the other hand, they have actually created very interesting products, and they have used those products to access markets elsewhere. United States being a large market for them. Now, as long as the geopolitics did not change, what we have the kind of changes that we have seen in the last 3, 4, 5 years, and where the markets were, probably both of these, play has had companies had their own place there and their own role. But given that India has created initial set of companies, Israel has created initial set of companies, and some of the markets are probably not available to each of the companies that we have seen in these markets. There's one collaboration that I'm seeing a lot more and more between the Indian founders and Israeli founders and the investors similarly, that can we join hands, and where we say that there is an Israeli product and there is a Indian company which has solved for market access, and kind of combine the two and try to take a larger market share, not only in the two geographies but probably global markets. That's one area that I have kind of seen. Second is what I understand has been generally talked about quite a bit, right? Which is the entire defense, and defense or security. Defense is one part of it, and I'll not touch upon that too much. But cyber security, which is actually another area, right? Similarly, in cyber security, if you look at the innovation that has come from India, it has been a lot more on the integration and a lot more services layer. So people have created platforms. People may not necessarily have created products as such, right? Because the cycle of innovation in a product is very different from how the cycle of innovation in platforms happen. So that's the second. Whereas Israel is, when we have looked at Israel companies, these companies have innovated significantly higher on the product side. So that there is another layer of collaboration that we thought until like last 2, 3, 4 years back that it was possible, and I'm starting to see that happen. There's a company that we are investing in, which is exactly doing what they have taken an Israeli product. They are trying to platformize this and make this available not only to the markets in the India but also to markets in the United States and the other large Western markets and all. But that's the second area that I'm seeing more and more collaboration. And the third area, which is probably a lot more new, right? And I think wasn't there until maybe 2, 3 years back or so, is a lot of these critical technologies, right? So critical technology when it comes to chip design, when it comes to, let's say, clean energy, when it comes to even agriculture, right? Now, gone are the days where the hardware and the software companies in all of these used to be different. The pace of the innovation is such that there is one company where the hardware or the critical technology has to be married with the software, and the software layer typically happens to be the AI layer and the artificial intelligence layer. This is where India has actually proven their mettle, primarily on a lot of training, a lot of data analytics. Whereas, so if that's another area of potential collaboration that I'm starting to see between very, very early stage companies, both in the two regions. As a fund, we invest in a slightly later stage. So we invest in what in our venture parlance we call it Series B and Series C. We typically write $10 to $25 million checks, but these are the companies which are raising initial round of capital, and they're trying to collaborate and see whether it makes sense to that. So from the experience that I have when I look at the two geographies, the two markets, and the extent of work that is happening in future technologies, I don't think it is we are at a stage where there are only possibilities. I actually see stuff happening. It may be happening at a lower level and probably takes a lot more effort. There are maybe 10 people in India who truly understand what Israel technology ecosystem is, and maybe there are similar number of people who understand the Indian tech ecosystem. We probably have to work closer, maybe as a part of this forum, as a part of this as a sub forum that could kind of originate from here. But that's one area I am extremely positive on, how the two nations can collaborate and potentially win, not only in these two markets but also some of the global markets.
Thank you, Ashish. Tanvi, over to your opening remarks, please.
Thanks, Nikhil. Hello, everyone. My name is Tanvi Ratna. I'm a new participant in the forum. It's been an honor to be a part of this dialogue for the last 2 days. I would say that, by background, I'm an engineer and policy analyst. I run a think tank which works very closely on the future of money, and it works on these digital currency issues. So I'm going to try and step out of that pigeonhole of like the future of money work and talk a little bit about the larger changes that I have seen in my last 7-8 years in India. I think I'm really a member here in this dialogue of this you would have heard of the new India, right? This term. And I think in the last like 7-8 years that I've been in India, I've really seen the change in the attitudes from that perspective, and I think I like to just speak to that. So I think in my story, I started off being part of when you think about foreign policy, the old world, right? I was analyst on national security. I had started off, Mr. Jaishankar, who's now our foreign minister. He was at that point the ambassador to China, and I was the first intern of his department, right? And I remember those old days of diplomacy, where at that point we had the first kind of Doklam standoff, and there were certain rules in the world order, right? Like the US, for example, was the hegemon. With China, India had an ambivalence. There was a way of doing business that had been the way for decades, in India. And you had the rise of the first new companies after liberalization, but business models were not as disrupted at that point. And from then on, when I moved, I moved to India in 2013, and I'll just talk to you about two stories that I think they mark the rise of what, in my mind, is the Israeli word of chutzpah. And I think since 2013, I've seen the rise of chutzpah in India, like from the top right to the bottom, right? And I think one of my first experiences to that I can recount from 2013, when I was actually working in the campaign team of Prime Minister Modi, and we at that point were conceptualizing this idea of the Chai Pe Charsha campaign, right, which became one of his key campaign planks. And I had just come in here so I used to be an analyst on the Hill, and I'd come in from there, and we've thought through this campaign, and it seems like an audacious thing because in India, there was not a culture of presidential debates and things like that and campaigns. And when we present this idea to Mr. Modi that, we had conceptualized it as a small campaign where, there was this there's a whole history to it with this chai wala critique, but we just wanted to have a policy dialogue over tea. Like, what could be more Indian than that, right? Like, you talk about your vision for the country over chai, right? And we conceptualized it as a small campaign where it would be a typical Indian setting. You would have the banyan tree, you would have a tea stall, and you would have a panchayat sort of a thing. And we present this to him, and in his typical fashion, like he listens with pinpoint attention right till the end of your thing, and then he says, I like it, but we're going to do it in 1,000 cities at once. And that's a scale that's almost unimaginable, right? And then he says that it'll happen in both tier 2 and tier 3 cities at once, right? And then we were the people to execute those kind of large scale things, right? And it was a very difficult task because we had issues like so I mean, the scale at which that had to happen was logistically impossible, but the vision was very big, right? And that's when I first got into this the speed and scale of change and the speed and scale of ambition and vision that was coming into India, right? And just to wrap up, like fast forward 7-8 years, I can just recount an incident from last week where I was sitting at a hackathon in Bangalore, right? And one of the participants next to me, seemed like a very young guy, and I was like, "What's your background?" And this is the largest hackathon in the world of Web3, and he's only 15 years old. And for 2 years, he's been working in a Web3 company. He's in 10th grade. And he's the co-founder of a company with his classmate who's in 10th standard. His other co-founders in first year of college. And this guy ended up winning this hackathon at 15 years of age. He beat out some 2,000 developers, who were excellent developers. And I mean, this is the chutzpah of the new India, right? And I think when you layer that with the new world order that we're entering, where everything is getting disrupted, I think there's just so much that India and Israel can do because we're both startup nations, right? And I think because there's so many new problems thrown up by this new world, this brave new world, I think there's just a whole world of opportunity open, right? So I'll just pause there. Happy to talk in subsequent discussion.
Thanks, Tanvi. What the panelists have pointed out is the incredible scope of the relationship. India has about 440 million millennials, and we account for about 25% of the global millennials. And so, to an extent, we will define, or the new Indians, will define new forms of consumption and of both products and services, and hopefully be part of a development ecosystem as well. I must, now that the initial remarks are over, I would like to tell the panelists that we are live streaming this session. So there will be hundreds of people listening to it at home or at work or whatever they may be doing so. But I'd like to take the opportunity to now open the floor to questions rather than my go on and ask the panelists questions. So if I could request you to just raise your hand, just tell us where you're from. First, we have Mr. Professor Porat.
Okay. Actually, I want to make one point and ask one question. So the point I want to make is that what we see in this forum, or maybe what we don't see in this forum, is the Indian academia, right? So there is the Israeli academia represented by us, Professor Shamir and myself, and of course by Daniel, and there is no any presence of Indian academia here. Now, it's not a criticism, it's an observation. And the question is, what is the conclusion, if at all, that we can take out from that? So one possibility is that, maybe from the perspective of Indian academia, their collaboration with the industry goes in a different ways, and maybe they don't need the forum, which is fine, right? And so I'm not sure what's the reason for that. Maybe it's a coincidence, but I think that also in the past, even though once or twice there was a president from an Indian university, but it seems as if he or she is there because he or she was invited, but we weren't sure whether there was a real interest in that. I don't say that there is no interest on Indian academia to collaborate with Israeli academic institutions. On the contrary, there is such an interest, and we know that, right? We've been, before we arrived to Delhi, we have been and met we've visited several Indian universities, and there is a lot of interest in collaboration. So this is one thing I want to ask, whether we, the forum, need to think about it and do something about it. The second thing is, so this is an observation. The second point is Daniel made a very interesting point that I try to, maybe we could follow up later about that, which is about the different cultures and how different cultures, right, the driving example and so on and so forth. The driving example, so I'm not sure that the people we collaborate with are necessarily people that really have different culture in this regard. When I talk to people, professors here, I feel like talking to Israeli professors or to American professors. Maybe the accent is different, even the language is the same, right? But the accent is different. I don't see. And besides, you are coming from science. I'm a law professor, so I'm coming from. How to say it, like, although I'm law and economics, which is a little bit harder than, but still, you are from core sciences. It's kind of surprising for me to hear that you think, I'm sure that you are right about it, maybe you want to say a little bit more about that when you do research, in scientific research, these different cultures really make a difference in collaborating on, especially in basic research, right? So I could understand that when we speak about translational research, right, translational research by definition is trying to answer real questions. And of course that, in India, say, clean water is a much more challenging and important issue than in Israel. And cybersecurity is probably more, more kind of a challenge in Israel for reasons that we've heard about earlier. So the questions might be different when it's about translational research, but it's not exactly the culture, it's something else. It's the needs more than or the demand more than the culture. And especially when it comes to basic research, it's really, I'm very curious to hear if you can even illustrate how could it be that, two professors, maybe, many people here actually studied the same place that you and I studied, not necessarily in Israel or in India, maybe in US or in UK or whatever. Yeah. Is the culture really makes a difference here? Thank you.
So I can even give you an Indian example, which I actually witnessed. But I can give you many examples with, I worked in Germany for many years with German, and actually was a director of a research institute in Germany as well. And I've seen how these things are happening. And, you could say German and Israelis are also the same professors, but the culture is very important. But I'll give you the Indian point of view, which happened, I think, 25 years ago. I was still a young professor at the Weizmann Institute. And, part of my work is in the field of astrophysics and astronomy. And we had an Indian guest, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name and from which university he came, but at that time, I'm going to give you a little lesson in astrophysics, so it's going to be fine. There's one sun and 9 planets. Well, by the way, there's only 8, but that doesn't matter, okay? This in our solar system, we know about the sun and 9 planets. About 25 years ago, that's all what we knew. We knew there were billions of stars. We look at the sky, but we had no idea if there were additional planets on all the stars we see, right? Think about this. This is a solar system, 1 sun, 9 planets. We see all these stars in the world, in the universe. And 25 years ago, nobody knew if there were additional planets around each of these stars. This was a question that scientists were asking themselves. Is that a simple example, the solar system where we're living, or is that general? And this gentleman came, and his assessment was, of course there are billions of planets. Say, how do you know? And he said, as an Indian, there's no way we can think we are the only one to be the center of the world. So there must be many other opportunities. That was one of the points where we start launching Exoplanet, which is looking for planets outside of the solar system. And so this is a simple example of culture. It has nothing almost to do with, how do we look for exoplanets, that is planets surrounding stars that are very far away. By the way, today, we know there are zillions of other planets, okay? But it took many, many years to start this research. And he's one of the people who actually convinced a lot of places to start this kind of research, to look for exoplanets. So this is a pure cultural issue. For him, it was a trivial issue. Nothing to do with the result, which is, of course, the same for everyone. Planet exists, and there's no doubt. So that's just an example of how imagination can be different. And in science, as I said, knowledge is fine. We need to have it. If you have no knowledge, don't deal with science. But more important is passion, curiosity. And these are different for different people. That's the way we're born. And I think there's a huge value. And my experience of working in Germany was exactly the same. We could deal about the same results, but the discussion we had was about how do we ask the question? I mean, what is an important question? In fundamental research, let's put it this way. When you're in the industry world, it is actually easier, let's say, in my opinion, to ask, what should we do? Because the end point is the market. At the end of the day, and that's very good, if you can't make money of what you're producing, then don't do it, because it means there's no market and it will not survive. In fundamental science, it's just the opposite, right? We're not looking for a result that makes money. We're looking for a result that provide new knowledge. And that is being looked at different ways from different countries. That has been really my experience. Perhaps it's not the case in the law school. I have to admit, I have no idea how this works. But in the world of science and fundamental sciences, it's very, very much the case. So, yeah. And I say again, there's a huge advantage between India and Israel for this.
I may add a little bit to that comment that you initially made, right? So I went to one of the IITs, which is the one of the premier engineering colleges in the country, and I can tell you that so it is not that the academia do not need us, right, or do not need any of us here. I think we probably have to do a harder job reaching out to them. Like your statement probably was a lot more true maybe until 8-10 years back or so, primarily because the interaction between the academia and the industry was far little. And it was also because traditionally the companies in India were not really innovating so much on the technology side. That has rapidly changed in the last 10 years. I can tell you that of the maybe 120, 130 odd unicorns that we have in the country, at least half of them actually consult with academia on many of these new initiatives that they're going to talk about. So the interaction between the academia and the industry is significantly more. And the second is that I know several of the faculty who probably studied with me, or a batch junior, a batch senior, and so on and so forth. They have also come to this side, and they have started to appreciate the role of interaction quite a bit. So I think we probably are reading too much into it. Maybe it just is that a matter of reaching out to them a little more than what we may have done so.
Thanks, Ashish. But to add on to your question, Professor Porat, maybe I'll get the ambassador to add in. But there's such a great degree of admiration that Indians have for Israel, that the success that you've garnered for yourself, despite all the odds, one could say that it's based on determination and focus on goals, but it's also based on the institutions and structure that have been set up, focusing on education being paramount, and then building that education ecosystem into industry and helping it collaborate. Do you think there's much more collaboration that we could be doing in this field, both at the forum level as well as countries?
So thank you very much, Nikhil. Yeah, I think that there is a lot of admiration towards Israel. As you said, I've served in quite a few countries, and the basic support towards Israel in India is second to none. People say that in spite of adversity, probably because of adversity, we developed as we did, because we had to stay ahead of the pack. That was always the motivation. When you are the smallest guy around in size, in population, the only way to survive is probably being ahead of the pack. There is a lot to do. One of our, there is a lot of demand here on the Indian side. We spoke about academia. It's not only academia. In all fields, wherever I go around India, there is a wish to cooperate with Israel. One of the biggest problem we meet in this request is the difference of size, of capacity. Israel being a very small country with about, I think, 10 universities, I believe is the number, 10 universities. None of them is huge. Very advanced, all of them, high level. So it's a small country, and the differences between universities are not as big as you would find in bigger countries usually. Yet the capacity is limited, and that's part of the limitation of working together. That's why we have to be very, very pinpointed in our efforts to do cooperation between academia in both our countries.
Thank you. Could I take the next question, please? Could I request you to introduce yourself, please, as well? Back.
My name is Samar and I study international relation. So my question is to Tanvi ma'am. We have already entered in a phase where Web3, big data, and all AI latest Chat GPT is making the noise. So and at the same time, world order is also changing in terms where liberal world order is shrinking. I think so, maybe debatable, but my concern is that as the liberal world order is shrinking, so will it further alienate the ethics as far as technology is concerned? Because as far as artificial intelligence is concerned, ethics has to be one of the main component which is not discussed much. So will that liberal world order alienate further the ethics from the technology? That's my question to Tanvi ma'am.
Thanks. Couldn't catch your name. What is it? Samarth. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, this is where, so we primarily focus on these disruptive technologies, right? And I think the ethics frameworks for these are sort of like we're winging it right now, right? To be honest, because if you think about with AI, there's still more fundamental research than there has been in things like blockchain in terms of ethics, right? And I think after FTX and things like that, there's now real debate starting on, what does that ethical innovation even look like. I think that's where just too many things are coming together, right? Like, so if you see the world order change means the value systems are really thrown up in the air, right? We are a very multipolar world. Like the way Indians think about like what our Indian values are different from what our Israeli values are different from what our American values, right? But there, I would say one thing about this brave new world thing that we are facing, right? I think on one level, yes, globalization is breaking, right? But on another level, if you see, millennials and Zoomers, like we're a very homogenous generation, right? Like it doesn't matter if you're a millennial in India or a millennial in Israel or a millennial in the US. Like, I mean, your lifestyle is pretty similar. Like your values are kind of similar. Like there's a certain worldview that, this young generation is coming up with. And like, this is something, that I see and which, we probably are not tapping into at policy levels. I think that I think it's that generation that's in the end going to define, like they are going to be the users of these technologies. And I think they're going to be also the builders of these technologies. And I think it's their values that are in the end going to define it. Like, I think we might try, and I work on the regulatory side, we might try all kinds of attempts to control and rein in technology. Like, I don't know how successful that's going to be. I think it's really the users and builders at the end who will define this. And I think that's a very different generation from the one that was there before. And I think we've not seriously started exploring their values and ethics, so that's what I'll say to that.
Thanks, Tanvi. Could we take another question from the audience? Could I request you to put your hands up? But in the meantime, while you think of questions, Ashish, maybe I could ask you, since you're privy to the ecosystem or the comparative ecosystem in both countries, a lot has been made of collaboration between startups, and you talked about that as well, between founders, both on market access, which has been solved here, and products and services which may exist. when we s- when you speak when we spoke to several venture capital companies from the Israeli side, they seem to think that there are many more hindrances towards this partnership. What do you suggest in terms of tangible steps that could be taken to help build that bridge? Is it a question of having access to more information on either side? Is it a greater degree of understanding? Is it more visits? What is
No, great question. So I think if you ask the founders and investors on the India side, you will get a very similar answer as well today, right? And the reason I believe that has happened is because people have traditionally tried to not honestly collaborate, but have a one-upmanship relation with the other one, right? So if there is a Indian fund or Indian investor who's saying that, hey, can I basically, me or my company own the other company and create a business out of it, right? And naturally, people have different ambitions, aspirations, and there's friction around that. Or we have seen the other way as well, because if you look at the way innovation is defined in these two countries, have been very different, Nikhil, right? So market access innovation, is that innovation or not? People may agree or disagree with that. Similarly, a product innovation, is that a better innovation than market access innovation or not? That's it. People may agree or disagree with that. So I think the common language has been missing so far, I think. And it is usually the way ecosystems kind of evolve, right? In the US, if you talk about it, or China, if you talk about it, I think people don't differentiate there, right? It depending on the geography and the industry, different innovations are valued more, right? So that is how why I think that understanding between both the ecosystems is kind of building up. And I chatting with somebody just prior to this, and I think what we were talking about is that what people need to do is to, rather than say that, hey, I am the company who will, who's the senior in this partnership, and then gonna take the world over. They have to better collaborate and almost create some kind of joint venture partnerships, right? And it could even be for geography based. The moment it starts happening, all that we need to see is that one or two success. We haven't seen one success, right? So if it's the moment we see one success, automatically people would start following that as a template, and better things would happen. So what I would absolutely see is that I think the visits are kind of starting to happen. I see Indians going to Israel investors, founders coming to India, but it just needs a little more structured approach rather than a very ad hoc approach that happens to be there. So one suggestion could even be, and I don't know whether this is under the scope of this forum, as an example, you could just create a more startup forum, tech forum, and then just enable that. And some of the countries have done that, right? Some of the other Asian countries have actually done that, and it takes 3 4 5 years before you get to that stage. But when you look at, let's say, some countries like Korea, Japan, there is significant greater collaboration between those two. I would say the startup economy between those two countries.
Thank you. Would there be another question? Otherwise, I'm going to ask the ambassador. They didn't talk about this free trade agreement. Some of these issues that Ashish brings up are structural in nature. Is there possibility to add them into these discussions? And also, is it possible to broaden the discussion of the free trade agreement into something like a CIPA, where you have a closer engagement and ecosystems of innovation, etc., that is possible?
I'm not an expert. There are people here who are greater expert in the FTAs, but there is a format for FTAs usually, and I don't think that this element has to be settled outside FTA. First of all, we need to settle an FTA to reach an agreement, and we are hopeful in the coming year we can finally do that. We have been walking around the FTA for about 10 years, too long. So this should be done, but I think that all the ecosystem to ecosystem, which is extremely important. I believe that once you put, we are in the time of storytelling, so I'll say that when Dr. Jaishankar went to Israel last October, I had the honor of accompanying him, and he went to meet with then Prime Minister Bennett of Israel, and Prime Minister told him, so the Prime Minister was a startup entrepreneur himself, and he had an exit in NASDAQ, so he moved the company to New York. They said they had quite a big group of people working in the company, but the two peoples or diasporas who were working the best together were the Indians and the Israelis. And I think that culturally it works well. Our job And I agree with you, Ashish. Our job is to expose one to each other. Once we expose the people to each other, great things will come out of it. So I see it as an ambassador. My only job is getting these together, because I know nothing about the next stage, how to take it forward. But they surely know, and they have the interest and the knowledge and the know-how. So this is, I think, is our challenge.
Thank you. Yes, we have a question in the middle.
Ambassador, I'm Akhilesh Suman. I'm from Sunset TV. Just I wanted to understand that India also requires technology of mass production, and mass production means we will produce in India and we will also export outside in the world. So, is India and Israel are they talking about any technology of mass production?
Yeah, there are better experts also on this from the group, but I will summarize what was discussed in the group, and I think that also Ashish is can speak about it because he said something about it. Look, Israeli company, Israel is an island. Israel is a very small country, de facto island, financially, economically. We are not too much connected to because it's high tech. We are less connected to our immediate neighborhood and more oriented towards more distant markets, which are more compatible. Now, we are one of the most expensive countries in the world for manufacturing. We are not good in upscaling. We have some companies who succeeded, but most companies are trying to take their technology and find the better company who knows how to upscale, go international, make it a commercial merchandise. So I think that's part of the great compatibility between India and Israel, because India has these elements of going big, going international. You mentioned it. So I think it's exactly you touched the point where we can do the most probably together in innovation.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think also in this forum, there were excellent discussion. And I think on that point precisely, there was one very interesting model put forth. I think Eden, if you're here, like he spoke about this. But he said that, Israel brings a lot of disruptive deep tech expertise, right? India has also tech expertise as well as market depth, right? And in the I2U2, you also have the UAE, which brings a lot of capital and a lot of interest to support these kind of innovations, right? So what they put forth as an idea is, can we look at these full stack companies, right? Things that can start small scale, go full feature product, scale, operate at scale, and do the whole B2C and B2B growth cycle, right? And I think it's very true. Like there is good opportunity to facilitate growth like that, right? And I think if India and Israel do cooperate that way, I mean, we could be setting up the next Googles and Amazons, right, of the world.
Yeah, we look forward to that.
I'll just add one point, Nikhil, on that question, right? So I honestly don't think that for the mass products we should spend too much of time between India and Israel, right? There are what we need. India, one is kind of quite capable of creating those mass products now from a technology standpoint. That's one. And the second is that where the advantage from a geopolitical, where how it is changing, is that more on more critical products collaborating there rather than on mass products, because this is the opportunity. If we do not spend time on the critical products today, I don't think we may have this opportunity 5 years down the line, because some other nation will just take over. So that is what we should be focusing on, not really, at least between the two countries.
Thanks, Ashish. There's a question back there.
My question to you is about I2U2. Can we see the summit happening next year? And when it comes to the grouping, how do you see the future of the grouping in terms of innovation as something that is being talked about?
Yeah, I2U2, yeah, we hope there are already discussions of meeting, not a summit meeting at this time, but the working level, expert level companies next year, early next year, first quarter, I hope. I2U2 is all about working together on infrastructure and making the world better, both for our peoples, the 4 countries, and for the rest of the world. And I think that many of it's all based technology based. If you look at the 2 projects that were already declared, both in food security and green energy, both of them are heavily based on technology. And the idea is to have private sector from all countries work together. So governments are going to pave the way, make the first connection, and then private sector will go on with the projects. So that's the main idea. It's not developing technology. I think it's making practice or use of technology.
Thank you, Ambassador Gilon. As we conclude, I'm going to give the last question and remarks from Professor. Could I ask you, in your capacity as chairing the Israel Science Foundation, how can our collaboration in high tech be a force for good around the world, as opposed to just in our bilateral relation? Could you, what would your thoughts be on how we could structurally approach this?
Well, that's a hard one. The answer is I don't know. I could stop here, and that's enough, right? You know, as you can see, it's tough enough to develop bilateral collaborations. And if you really want to go worldwide and to really make a global village of science and technology, I think we are facing difficulties because of the needs and requirements and capabilities and abilities of different countries. I think that, you know, it might be a big jump to go to that scale. There are natural ways of having scientists working worldwide together, and we know that very well. This is called scientific conferences. For you to know, scientific conferences is mostly not about learning what someone else has been doing, but actually meeting these people. That's what we enjoy doing. And when these conferences are international, then you really meet all of your peers in a very, you know, I would say, over a coffee. You, of course, listen to the lecture, but this is a setup that allow people to really meet each other and to start working. And most of the scientific collaboration I know about were developed by people who know each other. You should know that's another part. People like to work with people they know. I mean, that's the starting point, okay? Because the trust, because you know with whom you're talking and what he's able to do and so forth. It's not easy to make people working with others when they don't know each other. Now, you know, to conclude, I'd like to say a few words about the role of this forum. And it's always amazing for someone who has not been part of the forum for 15 years, but just came as a newcomer to be able to say something. They'll be very careful. But as I said, if I'm wrong, you should ask Ariel Porat to fire me, and that's fine. I think that together with a forum, which is valuable for discussing issues, one should try to have, I would say, joint activity that comes with the forum, perhaps even at the same time. It doesn't meet with the forum. And I say a few things about having binational scientific conferences on specific topics. We could have, and that's to the word of what Ariel asked. Where are the Indian universities? We could have a showcase of Israeli universities or Indian universities. It doesn't matter, however you want to look at. And I think these kind of activities that could actually get us to know each other. And I don't remember who said that, you know, we need to know each other, because that's very important to, at least in the academic world, but also we know that in the world of startup. I think the firm, you know, which is now 15 years, in the Jewish tradition, after 13 years, you're majored. It's called bar mitzvah. So we got it to that. If you've been bar mitzvah, it's time to get to the next level. And after observing the forum for the first time for less than 36 hours, I would like to see something which comes with it. And I just gave 2 examples of showcases and scientific conferences, because I believe these are drivers of people who would know each other. And the forum could be a very good basis for explaining why we need these kind of encounters. By the way, we could even invite it, not only Indian and Israeli, but, you know, that's complicated enough. And that's how I would start to move forward.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call this panel to a close. We have the ambassador who has to go for a Kargil anniversary function, and I think that is another point that we should remember as to how our relationships got strengthened when India really didn't have many people to turn to. And so thank you very much for that. But thank you very much for attending, ladies and gentlemen, and have a good evening.